Good evening. I'm John Batchelor. This is The John Batchelor Show. Great fun to welcome Mary Kissel of the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal and the host of Opinion Journal this evening. Mary, there's a deal to celebrate tonight because the Republican Party has delivered in the House of Representatives. Mr. Boehner has delivered despite all the, what you'd have to say, loud and passionate voices of conservatives. And this deliverance today, Mary, did you expect it at the editorial board?
I think we did. I think Republicans learned the lesson of the shutdown, which is that they don't win when they shut the government down. And I think the vote count tonight demonstrated that. 332
to 94, but we're going to go inside politics here. Mr. Drucker of the Washington Examiner joins us. David, a very good evening to you. I follow your Twitter feed very carefully, as I follow Mary's, and today you were bold to say that you believed that Mr. Boehner would win with 150 Republican votes in the House of Representatives. He beat that, David. Can you explain how he did so well? Good evening to you.
Good evening, John. And even I was a little bit shocked. But I think what happened is that you had Republicans who, as Mary said, learned the lesson of the shutdown. And so even this week, as I was talking to conservative Republicans that were not going to vote for this deal, they didn't trash it. They, in a sense, complimented Chairman Ryan for what he was able to achieve in negotiating with Senate Democrats and said that it really wasn't that bad, even though it was something they could support. And even, some of the staunchest Tea Party-aligned Republican lawmakers who, again, were not going to vote for it, said, of course, nobody wants to shut the government down, and this will avoid that. And I think that's what today was all about.
David, they looked like adults, didn't they? For the first time in a long time, the Republicans looked like a responsible party that could actually govern. I assume
they also looked like finally a group of individuals who understand political reality and who understood who their opponents were, that their opponents may be liberal, their opponents may believe in things that they think are bad for the country and not going to help anything, but that they are just as committed to what they believe in as conservatives are. And so I think at least for Republicans in the House of Representatives, it was evidence of a lesson learned. Although I'd add one thing, Mary, and I think this is very important. Obamacare is still not going well. Republicans don't believe it's going to get any better. And there was a motivation there not to do anything that would get in the way of their ability to keep the attention on the Affordable Care Act, its disastrous rollout, especially ahead of 2014 and the midterm elections.
David, was there also a motivation on the Democratic side to do a deal, look responsible, take the media attention away from Obamacare and toward the budget deal?
Well, I would say you bring up a good point in that for Democrats who have suffered because of the Obamacare rollout hasn't gone well, even though they didn't instigate the last shutdown, they didn't mind it politically because it was good for them. And I think given what the president's numbers have been and given how they have suffered, I don't think they wanted to goad Republicans into a shutdown. I don't think they would have just rolled over. And they probably would have taken their chances and said, hey, maybe this will work out for us again. And maybe it would have. But I do think they were, in fact, motivated to try and reach a compromise because things have not been going well for them either. And they didn't want to do anything that would sink the entire ship because they are on that ship. And they didn't see a second shutdown going as well for them as perhaps the first one did.
Inside the story here, it looks like Mr. Boehner delivered 169 votes, yes, and Ms. Pelosi delivered 163. Is that a significant fact, David, that the Republicans are more on board with bipartisanship in this instance than the Democrats?
Well, I don't know if you can go that far, only because when this bill gets around to pass in the Senate, and I do think it will, it's going to pass overwhelming Democratic votes and very few Republican votes. Senate Republicans really, really like the sequester. It's what they negotiated in 2011 to avert federal defaults and secure spending cuts in exchange for raising the debt ceiling. Senator McConnell helped engineer that deal, and so you have a different attitude among Senate Republicans, possibly because they're in the minority. They don't have the power or the responsibility to govern that House Republicans do. So in the House, I think this was important for Boehner because he got a healthy majority of his majority. He doesn't have to walk around explaining why, he needed 200 Democrats to get something through a Republican House.
Mary, your sense, Mr. Ryan, he did this, he put this package together with Senator Murray, and it is the Murray-Ryan deal. Did he assert himself in some new fashion here, getting something done in Washington?
Well, I think this is classic Ryan trying to reach across party lines. He did it, for example, on entitlement reform with Ron Wyden. This isn't new for him. He's been in Washington for a very long time, as I'm sure David would tell you. And this is also a very politically savvy deal because it accomplishes exactly what the sequester was meant to accomplish.
Right. Getting
some kind of entitlement cut, a permanent cut in mandatory spending in exchange really for minimal spending increases and no tax increases to pay for it.
Detail, Mary. He's got Potomac fever. Does this help him?
Sure. Of course it does. Absolutely.
David, Potomac fever. Is Ryan suddenly back in the game?
Here's what I would say. It all depends. But I think what we learned is that the fact that this was a Ryan deal with Murray, but that it was for the sake of the Republicans, it was a Ryan deal. Even the conservatives that didn't like it and wouldn't vote for it, at least in the House and the Senate, they wouldn't trash Ryan. They trashed the situation they felt was thrust upon them. And I don't think it really ever hurts members who act strong and lead. If you get beat up and you lose, that is a different story. He was strong and he led. So he will get beat up for this somewhat if he runs for president. He won't get beat up in a way that is fatal.
David, if President Obama leaves office with a greater income inequality than when he entered, which looks likely, with more political divisions than when he entered, which also looks likely, and the country is looking for a unifier, a guy that everybody can rally around on the left and the right, or a lady, who knows, doesn't this put him in a better position?
Well, it does if you're looking at a general election. You still have to get through a Republican primary, and I still think you're going to have a Republican base that is somewhat frustrated. However, if the trend we've seen with Senator McConnell and Speaker Boehner and other Republicans now reasserting themselves and joining the fight with the so-called conservative base, then what you have is a much more equal playing field among Republicans. And this is something new because the establishment, or so-called establishment, for so long has stood by. They didn't want to antagonize their base. And now what you have is a real debate. And so I think this definitely puts in the situation of a primary people that have had no choice but to work across the aisle because they had to govern. I mean, whether it's Governor Walker or Governor Christie, or Paul Ryan or some others, it could over time change the nature of what 2016 primary means. But I still wouldn't discount the fervor of the Tea Party base and their desire to see a lot of changes in the party going forward.
Right. We're looking at 2014 now. That's obvious. It's not just about the budget. So final question quickly, Mary. Right now, I understand for the Republican point of view, there are a lot of positives here. There are some questions open, but this looks to take away the strongest argument the Democrats had in 2014, that the Republicans cannot govern. It looks to be gone for the moment.
Yeah, it's gone, and it also leaves the playing field open for everyone here now to focus solely on Obamacare.
But they were counting on that. They were counting on more conflict for January, more conflict again in March, and it's gone.
Interesting, right? Because it is in the Democrats' interest to keep the pressure on the Republicans not to come to a budget deal. So you know they're in a bad place if they're coming to the table and doing this.
David, just a final thought. Did you hear that today, that the Democrats had lost a very good tool in their kit?
I think that anybody who's been following this knows that one thing the Democrats need is for Republicans to prove themselves unable to govern, and this takes care of a lot of that. There's still the debt ceiling increase looming out there at some point in 2014, but this does a lot for the Republicans, shows most voters that they're willing to govern, and it also allows to continue to focus on the Affordable Care Act.
David Drucker at the Washington Examiner. Mr. Boehner wins a big one. Mary Kissel, the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal and Opinion Journal each day, WSJ.com at 1 p.m. East Coast time, Australia. I'm John Batchelor.